Back to another Eduro Learning Live video. Today I'm here to talk to you about our Coaching Essentials series on YouTube, and I'm super excited to be sharing some of this with you because we just completed a 12-part series for YouTube called, Coaching Fundamentals, and I've interviewed 12 amazing coaches from around the world, and our second episode went live this week, and the focus of this episode is how to have a successful coaching conversation. I had so much learning going through those conversations with all of those coaches that I wanted to share some of my key highlights with you. If you see me looking off over to the right, that's because that's where my notes are. This video was really inspiring because I got to hear from so many different perspectives, and it's really great to hear those different perspectives to kind of remind you of things that maybe you don't always think about in your regular coaching practice. So the key highlights I'm going to share with you today, some of them might be things that you already know and you do all the time, and some of them might be little aha moments that you could apply in your coaching practice on a regular basis. This series is part of the lead up to our next The Coach Micro-Credential cohort, our second cohort, which registration opens on April 16th, and the cohort starts on May 1st. So if you're curious about what you might learn in that cohort, having that year-long mentorship program, what that might be like, please watch this YouTube series because you'll get a bit of a preview. And for today, just for today, because the sale is almost over, we have our recommended bundle of 3 courses called Coaching Essentials, and that's on sale for $25 today. So if you are seeing this video live in real time, you still have one day to catch that recommended bundle on sale for $25, and then tomorrow goes back to $65. So all of this stuff is leading up to our second cohort of the Coach Micro-Credential, and there's so much great learning coming out of our first cohort. I really cannot wait to start the second one already. And we're only going to open that cohort one time a year. So if you're a coach and you're interested in learning more about becoming an instructional coach or going deeper into your coaching practice, now is the time because we're not running this cohort again in 2018. Okay, let's get into the Coaching Conversations highlights. And I have kind of separated out my key learning into four big chunks. And I might forget some of these, even though I have these awesome notes right here. So do not miss the YouTube series. I think it's well worth your time. I separated them out into 4 kind of big themes. The first is the key skills in having a coaching conversation. The second one is the roles that we take as coaches. The third one are the goals that we have as coaches in those conversations. And then the fourth one is kind of the foundational approach to successful coaching relationships. And I'm highlighting different things that different people said in the series, and I'll try to remember who said them, but sometimes multiple people said these things. So if I don't reference the individual, it's not because it wasn't valuable, it's just because lots of people said the same thing. So when we look at that first kind of block of the key skills, something that came up in almost every conversation is being an active listener. And I know I've talked about that a lot in these live events over the course of this series leading up to the Coach Micro-Credential, but just the importance of reiterating listening with the intention to really hear what somebody else says and not thinking about what you're going to say is a key skill in your coaching practice, your coaching toolkit. And then following up on listening, that ability to paraphrase. And Heather mentioned really deeply in her part of the conversation the importance of pausing, because this should be a deep, meaningful conversation that you're having. You shouldn't have that kind of quick reaction statement ready back. You should need to listen and then paraphrase to clarify, and then pause to actually think about what you want to say. So I think those kind of 3 things all go together as key skills. Some other really good key skills that came up were the idea of mirroring the body language of the other person you're talking to, kind of building that rapport by mirroring their language and letting them know you're really listening, you're engaged. It just happens automatically, but you can actually practice mirroring body language so that you are building that rapport. Some other great phrases that came up were things like when a colleague is talking about something that's challenging and perhaps something we don't have any control over, it's something that's institutional or something that's stuck the way it is, Diana mentioned using the phrase given that. And I think that's a really great strategy. It's very simple. It's not something you need to really think about, but we know that there are blocks or obstacles in the work that we do. And so if we just address, given that such and such exists, what can we do to move forward? That's a great way to kind of keep the momentum rolling without getting stuck on that obstacle. Another great phrase that came out was from Ben Sheridan, and it goes back to my first point about listening, and he talked about being a supreme listener. And I love that idea of like really keeping your focus and thinking about your listening as a skill, so being that supreme listener. Of course, there's the strategy of less talk, more listen, that kind of all goes together, but the idea of using inviting language as opposed to telling people what to do, inviting them to consider ideas, and having the ability to consider a variety of ideas that maybe you would normally do, or maybe something that's kind of outside of your regular scope of practice. So just that kind of inviting language, being open in your communication. And then finally, another thing that Ben mentioned that I really enjoyed was holding the mirror back to the teacher. So as a coach, in your listening practice, you're just allowing them to kind of process what they're thinking. So you're a little bit of a mirror back to them of what they're saying through your paraphrasing, through your supreme listening, through your inviting language of new ideas. You're kind of holding that mirror back of what they're able to process, sharing that right back to them. So that's my first bunch of key skills. And like I said, those are just some highlights from what I saw. There's tons more in those videos. A second thing that came up that was really interesting, that kind of was a thread throughout the videos, is the idea of different roles that we take as a coach. There was a lot of conversation between the role of a coach as a consultant, someone who's there to help you kind of solve problems and provide new ideas and new insight, and then the role of coaching, who's really just kind of pulling great things out of a person that already exists. And sometimes there's a bit of tension between those two roles. So how do you make that choice between being a consultant versus being a coach? And I think that's worthy of a much larger conversation. So we're going to talk about that in our webinar that we are hosting on April 22nd with all of the coaches from this series. So if this topic is interesting to you, please register for that webinar, because we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this consultant versus coach conversation. In terms of coaching roles, we also talked about the idea of being a resource provider, someone who has lots of resources at their fingertips and they're able to provide those within that coaching conversation. And even thinking about building up the resources within the person that already exists, helping them find areas of strength and areas where they need some growth. And maybe for the areas of strength, you're just a coach, you're kind of pulling the ideas out of them. But for the areas where there's a weakness or something to be learned, that's when you're maybe providing some resources and you're a little bit more of a consultant. So that was my second kind of takeaway, is that coaching roles, and we're always making choices, like important choices, when we're having a conversation about the role that we're in when we're talking to our colleagues. So my third kind of big takeaway is the goals of our coaching conversations. And of course, we have those kind of immediate goals right in the moment, but there were some kind of bigger themes that came out that were really interesting. As coaches, our goals are to support what teachers want to do, what they want to grow, and how they want to be better teachers and learners with their students. And each conversation is part of a bigger practice, a bigger conversation that's happening over the course of a year or multiple years. And Tricia called it a staircase. So each conversation is just a step in that staircase towards that bigger picture of meeting those teacher goals. And I just love that idea that one conversation is not going to make or break anything. It's just part of that bigger picture. When we're having our conversations, a goal that's important for us to remember as coaches, and this is something I know I struggle with myself, is it's so important to meet teachers where they're at. Of course, we want them to be doing X, Y, and Z exciting thing, but we have to remember where they are in that moment. So really having that in the forefront of your mind as you're having that conversation, I think, is really critical. I can't remember who brought this up. I think it was Clint. As a coach, oftentimes you have some areas of expertise that maybe the teacher doesn't have. So part of your conversation in your coaching, and even sometimes in your consulting role, is to push teachers a little bit outside of their comfort zone, to open their eyes to possibilities that they might not have realized existed. And I think that's a really important conversation and distinction to make when we're talking about that coaching being pulling out of the person what already exists. What happens when there's something that they don't know about, and how do you kind of push them into that new area of growth for them? And I just want to highlight again the power of that deep conversation that Heather mentioned, that moment of pausing and thinking about what you're talking about, so that it's not just this quick, easy back and forth. It's really a deeper, reflective conversation. So that goal of having that deep conversation. So that's my fourth my third key highlight in that conversation. And then my fourth one is the kind of the foundation of what these conversations are all about. And I think the key is that your coaching conversations will be successful when you have good quality relationships with people. The success of your coaching is based on that relationship that you have. So always keeping that at the forefront of your mind, and the choice of the words that you use in that moment can have an impact on your coaching relationship. So thinking about the words that you use can be really important to kind of building and sustaining a quality relationship. And when you are building that relationship, you are thinking about starting from a point of strength in the other person. So what is the strength that they have, and how can you build on that strength to help them reach their goals? And then finally, when you're thinking about starting from that point of strength, you're not being evaluative. So in that conversation, when you're listening and you're having that deep conversation and you're reflecting on what they're saying and you're pausing, you want to be really careful in the words that you choose so that you aren't giving an impression of evaluating that person. Even though you're not doing it, sometimes the words you choose can have that impact. So those are kind of my four key highlights that I took away from this conversation: the key skills that you need in your coaching conversation, the roles that you might take, the goals that you have, and then the foundation of that relationship. So again, this series is awesome. There is tons of great resources and learning. These are just my takeaways, so please go check them out. I will leave the link in the comments so you can see them there. And remember that we have this great cohort of learners starting May 1st, registration opening April 16th, and that's called the Coach Micro Credential. And leading up to that, just so you guys get a sneak peek of what's going on, we have some courses on sale right now. We have an Ask Me Anything coming up 2 weeks from now, I think, with me, so you can ask me any coaching questions that you might have. We have the YouTube series that we are on our second episode right now, and we've got 10 more in the works over the next few weeks. We have our webinar on April 22nd, Sunday, April 22nd, which you can watch in real time or you can watch later. So don't worry, you can sign up even if you can't be there. And all of that will give you a bit of a preview, just like this video, to what you will learn in the Coach Micro Credential, which again, registration opens April 16th and the cohort starts on May 1st, and that's our only time we're running this cohort for 2018. So if you're interested in learning more about being a coach, please join us. We have learned so much in this last cohort that's just finishing up, and I'm super excited to start the next one. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. Any feedback, drop them in the comments. Let us know. We want to make sure all of these resources are relevant and useful for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.